Good evening. Thank you for being here so late in the day. My name is Gopal Ashok. I'm the product manager for Cloud Memorystore in Google Cloud Platform. Today we have about 20 minutes, so I want to give a quick overview of Cloud Memorystore and talk about some of the new things that we are doing with the service. But before I get started, quick poll: how many of you currently use Google Cloud? Okay. How many of you use Redis in Google Cloud in general? And how many of you use Memorystore? Okay, it's one person. Okay, so looks like most of you are new to Memorystore, so I think this session will give you a pretty good overview of what Memorystore is and what are some of the capabilities that we currently have. Feel free to ask questions as we go along. If you're asking questions, please raise your hand and somebody will come with a mic. And I like to keep it interactive, so feel free to ask questions as I go along. So a couple of topics. I just want to give a quick overview of Google Cloud's managed databases portfolio, just to give you an overview of what we have. Then I'll quickly go over the overview of Cloud Memorystore and also take questions. So when you look at Google Cloud Platform's portfolio of databases, one of the things that we offer is a wide range of different types of databases that are fully managed. I think one of the key advantages of coming to the cloud is that you don't have to manage your own databases. Instead, you can focus on your applications. But different applications require different types of databases. So when you look at the portfolio of databases in Google Cloud, you pretty much have a wide range of all the common types of databases that you would need to build your application. So Cloud Memorystore is what I will talk about today, which is our in-memory data store. We also have a couple of non-relational database data stores, which are Cloud Firestore, which is our document store, and Cloud Bigtable, which is our wide column store. On the relational front, we have Cloud SQL, which offers both MySQL and PostgreSQL as fully managed databases. And Cloud Spanner, which some of you may know, is an internal database that Google built for their large-scale systems, which we have now offering as a cloud service. And Cloud Spanner is a globally distributed relational database which can basically support massive scale. And lastly, the data warehouse, BigQuery, is our cloud data warehouse that's been used internally for Google for a long time, which is now offered as a cloud service. Beyond that, we also offer a number of different partner solutions in our marketplace. One of the things that we take pride in is that we offer, the open source. We support the open source community, and we want to make sure that the open source partners have an equal footing in Google Cloud Platform. So in the platform, we pretty much offer pretty much all of the popular open source technologies. So that's kind of the portfolio of databases that we have. So let's dive into Memorystore. I'm not going to spend time talking about why caching is important. I'm pretty sure everybody understands the need for caching and the use cases around it. There are some really good talks today and tomorrow on the different use cases for Redis. So I'm not going to dive deep into it. But the key point with caching is that two main reasons, right? One is to reduce latency for your application, which is one of the primary use cases. But we also see customers using cache as a way to reduce cost for the backend database. How many of you use caching as a way to reduce cost for your backend databases? Okay, a few. And from a use case perspective, again, there are wide varieties of use cases where caching is applicable, from web mobile to social media to ad tech. Again, there are a number of sessions today and tomorrow that talks about the specific use cases, so I'm not going to get into that. So let's dive into Cloud Memorystore. Simply put, Cloud Memorystore is a fully managed service for Redis, right? And it's fully managed by Google. We make the service, provide the service in a very highly available and reliable manner. We take care of the replication. We take care of the automatic failover. We also provide an availability SLA for the service, right? We also provide automation around scaling. We make sure that the service is secure. So one of the things that we do is we only expose the service using private IP within the Google domain. It is not exposed to the internet. So that makes it more secure in terms of access to the service. And we also back it up with support for granular access control using IAM policies. So that's kind of at the high level what Cloud Memorystore is. But if you dive into it, we offer the service in two tiers. One is the basic tier, and the other is the standard tier. So the basic tier is essentially a single standalone instance of Redis. Again, here we take care of all the health monitoring. We ensure that the recovery is automated, so you don't have to worry about bringing an instance back up if it goes down. And we ensure that the IP is preserved in case the instance is restarted, for example. So from an application perspective, you have a persistent endpoint that you connect to, and we take care of all the management. The standard tier is a replicated Redis instance. So when you create a standard tier instance, what we do is we automatically replicate the Redis instance across two different zones. So what that means is that you get zonal protection. So if a zone goes down, we automatically fail over to the other zone, and you have a highly available Redis instance. The key thing for standard tier is that we have a single endpoint. So we have a virtual IP that basically points to the instance. So even if there's a failover, there's no change on the application side, we automatically redirect the connection to the new master. And the other thing with the standard tier is that when you scale up and down, it's a highly available operation. There is a small window of time where we have to do a failover, where your application will be disconnected as part of the scaling process. So that way, if you have a need to scale the instances, you can do that in a highly available manner. And lastly, we provide 3 nines of availability for the service. So Cloud Memorystore went GA about 4 or 5 months back. So we've been working very hard in terms of providing more features for the service. One of the things I want to point out is that in both of these cases, Memorystore is a single master deployment. So what that means is that if you ask the question, do we have Redis cluster at this point? No, we haven't released Redis cluster yet. So both basic instance, obviously, and standard tier are single master deployment. So all your application load is going to one single node, right? So in terms of what we've been working on, we started with 3.2 when we released the service. We now provide 4.0, and we will be providing 5.0 pretty soon. We also just released a manual failover command. Why is this important? So when you build applications on any of these cloud platforms or using managed services, one of the things that you really want to do is test your application for how the service behaves, right? So in a standard tier instance, we can have failovers if something goes wrong in the infrastructure. So you want to make sure that your application is tested for the behavior that the service has when a failover happens. With manual failover, you can actually test that before you deploy your application into production. The other thing that we have been doing is we've been exposing a lot of monitoring metrics that will help you monitor the system and also keep your system reliable and stable. So one of the things that you would notice about Redis is the issue of memory fragmentation. And that's very common, whether you're using Redis as a self-deployed Redis or in any of the managed services that you have. That's just the nature of Redis. So I think it's very important then to be able to monitor memory fragmentation that's happening in the system and be able to take action based on that. So the system usage ratio is one of the metrics that we just released that will allow you to monitor your memory fragmentation. And based on that, you can now set alerts on using Stackdriver, for example, which is GCP's monitoring platform. And then you can take actions like scaling your instance if your workload is causing a high level of memory fragmentation. So what that does is essentially gives you the control and the ability to basically automate some of or watch out for issues that typically causes Redis to either slow down or in some rare cases crash. Right? We also expose a couple of other basic metrics that will be useful for you to just monitor scenarios where sometimes Redis can go slow. When you have a very high write load, the replication lag can get pretty high. One of the things that you don't want to do is to have your replication lag too high, because some of the if a failover happens, or in some cases, we prevent certain actions from happening if the replication lag is too high. So there are certain conditions that you want to monitor, and so we have exposed metrics for all these. And role switch is another metric that we expose, where you can understand how, if a failover happened a few times over a month, you can understand how many times a failover happened, and if an issue was caused because of a failover. So the bottom line is we've been basically trying to provide more and more transparency into the service so that you can manage the service and understand how the service is behaving for the workloads that you have. We are also working on an import-export feature, which will allow you to take RDB backups to a GCS bucket and also restore backups from the bucket. This will allow you to migrate data into Memorystore or backup data from Memorystore, migrate data out of Memorystore. So that'll give you the flexibility to just move data around. One of the things I do want to point out is that we haven't enabled AOF in either the basic tier or the standard tier instance. We use standard tier as one of the highly available instance where you have redundancy for the data, but we don't have AOF enabled, so there is no real persistence of data that is available right now. That's something in the roadmap that we are working on. Any questions for everyone?
So what is the charging mechanism? How do you charge the customers?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the question is, how do we charge how do we charge customers? Let me get to that. Actually, the next slide is about that. Quickly on the provisioning side, we basically provide a very simple provisioning model. The UI is pretty slick in terms of provisioning Redis. It's very simple. But if you are using things like Terraform, any of the script-based provisioning or automation frameworks, we support that too. Today, we support 3.2 and 4.0 in the service. So how do we price the service and how do we tier the service? So I talked about basic and standard tier. The way we have designed the service is that the more memory you provision, the more throughput you get. So think of M1, M2, M3, M4, and M5 as pricing tiers, right? So for the different memory the memory ranges, you get different network throughput. So if you have a workload pattern where you need higher network throughput, you would want to provision higher memory sizes. So how is the pricing done? We price by gigabyte hour. So essentially, every tier, M1, M2, M3, M4, and M5 is priced at gigabyte hour, right? So if you, for example, the M5 is priced at 1.8 cents per gigabyte hour. So what that means is that if you provision a 100 gig instance, it's 100 times 1.8 cents per hour, right? That's how it's priced. And each of the layers above will have different gigabyte per hour pricing for basic and standard. And lastly, the monitoring is very nicely integrated into stack drivers. So we expose a whole bunch of metrics, and I talked about a few of the metrics that we have. But we expose pretty much all the metrics that is needed, and it's in stack drivers. So that's a central kind of monitoring platform for GCP. With stack driver, you can set alerts, and you can basically take action on those alerts. So all that is built into the service. So let's take a quick look. I talked a bunch about the service, but let's take a quick look in terms of what the interface is, if you haven't seen it yet. Is that big enough for the folks in the back? Okay. So let's just quickly look at the provisioning. So instance ID, you can pick the version. 4.0 is essentially what we recommend that you use. So talking about pricing, essentially, we have a pricing widget that will tell you how much it is based on basic and standard tier instances. So if you provision a standard tier instance, you can pick a region. So one of the things with the Memorystore today is that it is a regional service. We don't allow access cross regions. How many folks have use cases where you want to provision an instance in one region but want to access it from another region, like a distributed cache? So that's one of the things that is currently not available, but that's something that we are working on. And like I mentioned earlier, as you increase instance capacity, you can see that the green bar, which is a network throughput, keeps going up, right? So that's essentially what the provisioning model is. And the security model is you can authorize the VPC network. VPC network is essentially the concept of network within a project in GCP. So what that means is that you can authorize, if you have multiple VPC networks, you can authorize a specific network to have access to the service, right? So it's a pretty straightforward provisioning model that we have. Once you're provisioned, you can basically go in and you are monitoring right in the console. A lot of the metrics are exposed over here. The other thing I forgot to mention is that if you want to scale the instance, you can actually go to Edit and basically change the size that you want to scale to, right? And just click Save, and that'll automatically start the scaling process. And like I said, for a standard tier, the scaling process is a rolling upgrade. So that means the instance is available for that brief period of time where we need to quickly do the role switch as part of the scaling process. And yeah, so in terms of monitoring, like I mentioned, I have created a dashboard here that basically gives you all the metrics. Let me see if I can zoom in. So you can create your own dashboard if you go into, for example, Metrics Explorer and look for Redis or Memorystore. You can see all the metrics that we have made available in Stackdriver. So you can build your own custom dashboard based on different instances that you have if you need to, but all the metrics are available in the Stackdriver dashboard. And again, like I said, you can create alerting policies in Stackdriver based on the metrics. So one of the things that we recommend is that watch out for the system memory usage ratio. One of the things, like I said, fragmentation is a big problem. So you can actually put an alert on the system memory usage ratio for, let's say, 50 or 60%, and you can get an alert. And one of the things that you can do is you can actually automate the scaling operation using something like Cloud Functions. So that's some of the things that you can do to make sure that your Redis instance doesn't get into a state where, because of fragmentation, your application slows down. So using Stackdriver and Cloud Functions, you can actually create a good workflow to basically prevent those kind of scenarios. Okay. So that's kind of the overview. I got about a couple of minutes left. I just want to make sure that I leave some time for questions. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Nope.
Hi. Does the managed services enable the active defragmenter in the background? Because with JEMlog, you could do that.
Yeah. So the question is, with the managed service allow active defragmentation. So one of the things that I didn't show you is that when you create the instance, we have exposed some of the options here, Redis config. So one of the Redis configs that we have exposed for Redis 4.0 is active defrag. By default, we have set it to no. So if you want to use it, we are just looking to see how the system behaves. And we are doing some testing and looking at instances that have turned it on to yes. So at some point, we may decide to turn on active defrag by default, but right now it is available to you to set it.
Hi, is 300 gigabytes, is that your hard limit?
Yeah, so the question is 300 gigabyte the hard limit? So yes, so right now, like I said, it is a single master. One of the things about Redis and one of the best practices is that you don't want to have a really high single node instance, right? You have the option to go up to 300 gigabytes. So then the question is, how do you get higher size instances? So scale out is the answer to that, right? So we haven't enabled that yet, but at some point you need to be able to scale out your instance, and that's a way to grow your cluster.
You plan to offer Redis modules?
Yeah, so the question is, do we plan to offer Redis modules? That's a very good question, a question that we get pretty much all the time. We haven't enabled it yet. The challenge with enabling Redis modules is essentially third-party code running in our service. We are looking at ways to do it. One of the things that we are also looking at partnering very closely with Redis Labs to see if we can expose Redis Enterprise as one of the options that you can use in Google Cloud Platform. So that's one of the angles that we are looking at. But in terms of providing that as part of Memorystore, we are looking at it. We still haven't have a clear plan in terms of how to enable that yet. Any more questions?
Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.